All right, great. So while we're waiting for people to join, I guess I'll just say welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us again. And I'm going to do a little update on what's been happening recently in Oso world. So let's see. So since the last time, I guess you can see it down here. Last time we spoke about, I use the same backgrounds. Okay, now I'm gonna have to change this. Otherwise, won't be able to tell which stream was which. Let's go with this gloomy, rainy thing, which is gonna be a nice contrast with the really fun, exciting stuff we're doing today. Okay, yeah, so last time we spoke about data filtering. That's actually going to come up a bunch again today, but we went into some of the more details of what the hell that means and like how that works under the surface. Since then, we've had some few releases. We had kind of a minor release, which is enabling some better support for different platforms in the form of Oso 11.3. So in particular, Node supports some more things like web workers. That's another great community contribution. And Go, we made it so that it supports like Alpine Linux. So it's using the static like muzzle library so that it can be supported across both systems with libc and muzzle C libraries. And we had some other nice additions to the Rust interface. So that was like some small things in 11.3 that came out. And then we had a bunch more exciting stuff coming out in Oso 0.12. So for example, data filtering, which we spoke about last time, we did a bunch of performance improvements there. Have some cool benchmarks on that, but ultimately, greatly increase the speed of a bunch of the data filtering queries, which is awesome. We have a nice little kind of syntax smoothing out where in like regular policies, you can always write this like resource.is public, and if it's public as a Boolean and it's true, then this succeeds. But this previously didn't work in data filtering policies. You had to write this like explicit version. So we fixed that, which is a really interesting one. In another day, maybe we could go into the deep. It sounded like a really, really small fix, but it's really interesting with language design that you have these seemingly small things on the surface, which like opens up a whole Pandora's box of language design implications. Because this one's really interesting. It's like, what does it mean for like a value to be kind of like queryable? And in Prolog world, they call this like callable. And this idea of like it defaulting to checking if it's true or not is kind of like one possible solution, and there's interesting implications around that. You can see there's a bunch of additional improvements to the Rust library, Node library, Go library, all kinds of little updates. So yeah, this is all great, and in the changelog as well, you can see a lot of these were from even more community contributions. So thanks to all the community for those. There's some great stuff there. Right, so yeah, those are kind of like two of the main Oso updates. I saw a podcast recently as well, if you're interested. And we also released chapter 3 of our Authorization Academy guide. So for those who aren't familiar, this Authorization Academy is kind of a series of guides on how you go about building authorization into your application, which is obviously what we're doing at Oso, but this is we're providing this in a non-Oso specific way. So these will just talk you through like from a high level, like the architecture and how to think about implementing authorization. And the roles modeling one is a kind of a really fun one because we just found there's not much good information out there about like what it actually means to implement roles. And there's this like RBAC term, which only really covers a small piece of it. And, we try and go very concrete into giving you, schema diagrams and flowcharts on how the roles flow works. And this is obviously very relevant for today, right? So what we're going to be looking at today is basically how we're planning to take all of these like possible implementation designs, models, things like that, each of these like flowcharts, and basically how do we just give you this out of the box with Oso. So there's going to be a few parts to that. There's going to be the logic that backs these kind of flowcharts. Side note, this is pretty much exactly why Polar the language exists, because a lot of authorization does look like this kind of flowchart. Does the user have a role? If not, do they have a role in the organization? Does that organization allow roles to be inherited? Does it so on, so on, so on? So like this is really great stuff to encapsulate in logic programming. And one of the things we'll see is just how concise we can do it later. But also some of this, supporting these like data models out of the box. So you don't need to think about like how to design your schemas. So yeah, a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, you can basically read about in Authorization Academy, just if you're interested in like kind of the background information and what's going on. And we'll be releasing more of these soon. The next one will be about relationship-based models, which is kind of like a generalism on roles that we might touch on later. All right, so I think I've given, oh yeah, and of course the really important information, the tea of today. So I'm drinking hojicha. It's a Japanese tea that actually comes from the what would it be? The branches, the twigs, the sticks. I'm not sure officially which like part it is, but it's basically it looks like the little twigs, basically piece of the tea, right? So it's not actually the tea leaves, which is kind of interesting. It's like from the sticks, the twigs, and it's incredibly tasty. It has this kind of like, it's got this kind of like brownish stems. That's the word. Thank you. It's got this kind of like brownish tint to it, and the taste is, I don't know how to describe the taste, but it's delicious. I'd really recommend you trying it. It's a very interesting alternative to like whatever your typical like green tea or like black tea, English breakfast tea, that kind of thing. It's like kind of a different one. And it actually makes a really good Kit Kat flavor as well. In Japan, you can get like all flavors of Kit Kats, and there's a hojicha Kit Kat. It's really tasty as well. So that's what I'm drinking. You can get hojicha most places. I'm getting it from Ippudo has a branch in New York. We got it from. Oh, it's so good. It's also caffeine free, so I already had my coffee this morning. Can you spell that tea name? Hojicha. Yeah, that's a great request. No worries. Cool. All right, so let's talk about roles and things. All right, so what are we looking at now? What have I got on the screen? So all throughout Authorization Academy, we've been talking about this example of Git Club. This is somewhere between a GitHub, GitLab clone, hybrid of those two things. Basically, we found like the GitHub model is really useful as a way of thinking about common authorization patterns, especially because it's one that most people are familiar with. If you're working as a developer, you're probably familiar with at least one of the two. And it has all these kind of like structures of things like users inside organizations. You can be inside teams. You can have repositories belong to organizations. You can have teams assigned to orgs, or sorry, teams assigned to repositories. You can have users assigned to repositories. There's like a lot of those like structural elements that are all kind of very common piece of authorization. And so whether you're dealing with like file systems where you have like folders and files, that kind of maps very nicely to that same structure of like organizations and repositories. Or like project management often has like projects and tasks. Again, these all kind of like fit into those same patterns. So everything I'm going to be talking about today will be in terms of this GitLab application, but hopefully it will be clear that these are patterns that you can readily go and apply in whatever your application is. And if you have, I'd love it if people along the way chime in with questions. If you have a particular data model in mind and you're not sure how it fits into what I'm talking about, go and ask it in the chat, and I'll try and address that. Okay, so all right, so I'm going to start with my base application. So I was saying, GitLab is something we're building. I'm just going to close all of these for now. So GitLab we're building as like a companion piece to this Authorization Academy. So a way that we can actually just show you all the things we're writing about. We can show you what that looks like as an implementation. You can see by the project directory at the side here that we have a backend and a front end. So the backend is going to be a Python application. We're using Flask as the kind of the web framework driver, and SQLAlchemy as the database backend. And then the front end is a React website, which I guess we'll see bits and pieces of this, but I'm probably going to mostly be talking about the backend because that's, I guess that's where my focus is at the moment. So, okay, so here you can see the file structure. I just have my two folders, backend and front end. Going into my application, right? It's here is my layout of my folder. So in it is where I'm going to have the core application logic. I have some fixture data to generate some dummy data, and I got my models. So let's look at the models to start with. So here's where I'm defining my like SQLAlchemy data models for GitLab. All right, so you can see we've got a few of the ones you might expect. So just taking one as an example to start with, right? So if you're not familiar with SQLAlchemy, it allows you to define your data models, in this kind of like object-oriented, somewhat declarative fashion by extending this like base class. So what I can do if I want to define my organization model, I create a class and subclass of base, and basically I define what columns that model should have. So it has an ID, which is a column of type integer, and I'm going to use it as the primary key, and so on. Right. So this is me giving a definition of the organization model. You can see I provide a table name, which is what it gets stored as, like in the actual SQLite database. All right. So if I was to jump into a terminal, for example, I can see, here's my little roles.db for this application. Not sure why I called it roles.db. I guess the demo app is roles. And I can just run, SQLite roles.db, and I can now run my usual like SQL queries, select star from organizations, right? And you can see I've got a couple of data entries already, right? So ID number 1, the name of the organization is the Beatles. The Beatles has a base repository role of read, and the billing address is Penny Lane, Liverpool. Okay, so here's my organizational data. It's the schema of that, the format is defined in SQLAlchemy, and the data is just stored in the database. And so I've got the same thing for a bunch of other models. I have users, my GitLab users. They just have an ID and an email address. Users come along to teams, although I won't be doing much of that today. And we have repositories, right? So repositories, they belong to a particular organization and they have a name. It's kind of the main pieces of the organization. And we have some issues as well. Okay, so that's like my base GitLab data model, right? So we have users, organizations, repositories, issues. So those are kind of the main ones we're going to focus on. And all right, so with, I don't need that anymore. Don't need that anymore. Cool. So, okay, so I'm ignore this. So I'm running my Flask app. I have my React running with yarn start, right? So I'm running that with the front end with yarn. And this is running into, everything is running in dev mode, so it's going to be like automatically refreshing. And with that going, this is what I'm not looking at. This is our GitLab application. This is the front end. It's, we haven't done much styling. We just mostly focused on getting the basic data in here. So far you can see I'm logged in as admin at admin.com. And I can do a few things. I can navigate through, see the organizations. So here you're seeing, let's make this bigger. There we go. We have the Beatles and Monsters Inc. like we saw in the database, right? I can go into orgs. We get some errors because I haven't set up roles yet. But here we can see some information about the Beatles. The Beatles has some repositories. In my repository, Abbey Road repository, I have some issues. So, this is just, the base thing, just kind of showing the like structure of my application. And right now I don't have like any, I don't really have any authorization in place. So if I'm logged out even logged out, I can navigate through and see whatever I want. There's like nothing stopping me from doing that. I can log in as someone else, John at Beatles, and I can still see everything. So what we want to do now is like, we want to address this, right? And this is the idea is like, if this is our starting point, I have an application with my core data models, and I want to do authorization. Like, what are all the things I need to do? And basically what we want to provide at Oso is just like the fastest way to go from like this to having like everything you need with kind of as little work as possible, basically. And without having to think about like what's the right model, and without having to go read through Authorization Academy and internalize all the data models and work out how to structure them. So I'm going to kind of show you what that looks like, basically. And yeah, if anyone has any questions along the way, please do just put them in the chat. I've got it up in the side window here, so I'm keeping an eye on that. I'm going to save us some tea. Okay. So first of all, if you read the Authorization Academy post on architecture, you might know that I'm going to want to add my authorization inside my like my controllers, in this case, my route handlers. So here's where I have my main like Flask application responding to a bunch of API for all that data, right? So everything all the front end has been driven by this this Flask API backend. So in particular, what can I do? So look, we have an organization index that lists all the organizations, and I should be able to. Oh, what port is this going to listen on? Uh, 5,000 probably. Let's just guess. Nope, that was 500. Got it. Okay. So for example, right, you can see that all the data that's driving the front end is just available through a simple API. So if I call the organization list endpoint, I get back all the data just in like simple JSON form. So this is what we really want to control, right? Like we want to enforce authorization. We want to not, someone who doesn't have access to, let's say this, shouldn't be allowed to read this organization, shouldn't be able to see this data. And so we need to do that on the back end, because if we just did it on the front end, someone could just bypass it and make the API call like I just did directly. And really, again, this is like kind of covered in Authorization Academy, but the kind of place we want to add that information is in these like route handler methods. And the reason is because there is where we can actually have that like fine degree of control around both like all the context of what the user is trying to do, and also we kind of like have the objects in our hand. We're sort of able to do this kind of like the right granularity of access control. Like we know they're trying to read a specific repository. We have it in our hands. We can choose to allow or deny that. Or if they're trying to list all the organizations, we then need to do something more complex, like choose which ones they should be allowed to see. All right, so I'm going to light some details a little bit. Well, I guess I'll share them briefly. So I set up my application already with SQLAlchemy Oso. I kind of don't want to focus on that too much. We've done plenty of other tutorials or videos. We have docs and all this sort of stuff around how to use like the SQLAlchemy Oso piece in particular. But I kind of really want to get to the roles piece of this. I'm gonna give a very small amount of context here, so bear with me. We basically, before every request, we're going to provide both a regular session object and an authorized session object. The regular session object allows me to make queries to the database without authorization, and the other one will add authorization in like to the database request. And so this is the main mechanism through which I'm going to do authorization, is use this auth session down here. You see there's some other things going on here, like we're setting the current user and things like that. So, okay, so what I can do, I can go ahead and change session to auth session in my orgs index. And what happens when I do that? Let's find out. So now I get nothing back. I get no organizations. And if I go back to my front end, no organizations. I can't see anything. And if you're familiar with Oso, you probably know this by now, but Oso is deny by default. So if I haven't explicitly told it to allow anything, nothing's going to happen. And so instead, what I can do is, this will give me my demo file. I can start adding some very simple policies to say what should be allowed. And just to confirm this is working, I'm going to go and add an allow everything rule. So allow any user to do any action on any resource, and we get their organizations back. All right, great. So how am I going to go from this like blank slate to like having a rich structure of roles, permissions defined by roles, and things like that? So I'm going to kind of like skip ahead a little bit to show you what this looks like as the ideal end state. And then I'm going to like go and peel back some layers and show you what's going on under the surface. I think it'll be more fun if you get to, given that I'm sort of giving you a bit of a preview of upcoming feature, I want to show you what the end experience is going to be like before we kind of like go into the weeds of the details of this. So what I have, Sam with roles, probably needs to check out this branch. Okay, so here is I'm gonna delete some of these So we just have the kind of empty template. So basically in the kind of upcoming Oso features, we're going to provide a bunch of this like roles functionality built in so that all you have to do is fill out this. So this is a, a role rule, and basically it's asking you to just kind of like tell us what you want how you want your roles to work. Well, not even how you want them to work, just like what you want the roles to be. So for example, I want my roles to be over organizations, and we need you to give us the kind of definitions. I can even get rid of this one for now. Like what are your role definitions? And the exact format of this configuration is subject to change a lot. This is just kind of for the sake of a demo, what this is going to look something like this. So I might, for example, have an owner role, and I want to say owners can they can basically do everything. They can read, they can write, they can create, they can delete. I'm specifying all the permissions that the owner role can have, and I want there to be a member, and they can just read, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and let's see what's happened. Do I have I done things correctly here? This looks about right, but I can see everything still. What role does John have? Oh, okay, John. Oh, wait, why is John's not a member? What have I missed? What have I missed? Oh, I haven't made organization auth session, right? So I need to go back to making sure I'm authorizing access to organizations. Cool. All right, and there we go. Okay, so now John can only see the Beatles, right? And so within the Beatles, we're all good. And I can log out and log back in as Mike at monsters.com, at Monsters Inc. Mike currently can't see anything. That doesn't sound right. What about admin? What can admin do? Oh, maybe I didn't click on orgs. I always forget that. Mike at monsters.com. Failed to load orgs. Oh, I failed to log in again. Monsters.com. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Mike can see Monsters Inc. And so, we've now got a little bit more stuff in the UI that's getting filled in here, which is querying the roles model. But you can see we've already got a little summary of who has what role. So admin's an owner, Mike's an owner, Sally and Randall are members. And here I can even go and assign some new members. So John's not yet a member of Monsters Inc. But if I assign him that, then I should be able to log out as. Log back in as John, and now I can see everything again. Cool, so we have roles, and all I had to do was just fill out, I keep misspelling monsters as monster. All I had to do was just fill in this. Like that was it, right? And then do auth session to make sure that things were being authorized correctly. So yeah, I mean pretty much end of demo. I can create role definitions, and this is all I had to do. So how basically, like what just happened here? Like how is this possible? So this is really, this is kind of boiling it down. Basically what we've discovered is that a lot of this really is the only information that is sort of distinct or unique between like role implementations in different companies. There is a resource you're protecting, and then there's really just the definition, this like map of things. And so we're like, well, we're just going to like implement everything else for you and then you just need to focus on the piece that you care about, which is like telling us how your application should work. And so, for example, this has all been driven in this demo. I mean, this isn't the final implementation of it, but I basically have this would be like the built-in Oso policy that handles all of the like the logic that's behind the role-based access control. You can actually see it's pretty condensed. It's only under 50 lines basically to implement a very, very rich resource-based role model with inherited roles and things like that, which I'll show in a second. And then the other piece is we're, and this is kind of one of my favorite pieces, we're using what you tell us you want to have as roles to generate all the right data models and things like that. So if I, let me cause this to reload. So you can see when we start up, we have the, I've just printed out some statements. There's also repository roles, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, we're actually reading this policy because this is effectively declarative configuration. You're telling us, here's what I want to be true in my application. I want there to be organization roles with these definitions. But we can both feed that into how we implement the logic for it. But also we can just like query for that information to so we can know like what roles you want to be created. So let me show you what I mean by that. I need to open a different window. And again, the logic I'm showing you here is not the sort of final version of things. This is more of a proof of concept I did for myself. The team is hard at work at making a more reliable, robust version of this effectively. But so we have this helper class, Oso roles, and you basically call enable on it. This is like the entry point to just like setting up everything. And you pass it in, your Oso instance and like your SQLAlchemy base model and your user model. And we're going to go and like set up all of the role models, tables, and things like that based on what you told us. So you can actually see in here, I'm actually just directly querying effectively the polar policy, which is in this case your like role configuration. I'm just directly querying it and saying like, cool, tell me all the roles that you've defined. Pull out the resources and the list of like role definitions, and I'm going to go and do my like SQLAlchemy magic here to go and construct the data models for it. And this is actually the version I have here is actually based off our existing SQLAlchemy roles implementation. So we already provide some of this like mix in things for you to go and create them yourselves. But basically we've gone that like extra mile and just kind of gone and handled all the things you need to do, provided some helper methods like assigning roles and getting a list of roles and things like that. And so this is like behind the scenes, this is powering everything. It's just like you write this configuration once, and that gives you like all the configuration you need. I see there's a question, is this being recorded? Yes, we record all the Twitch streams. So yeah, we'll make the whole video available afterwards. So yeah, so like, and so I think, I don't know, I just find this really cool. Like this is really, I kind of teased this in some of the tweets around this. I think this is really getting closer to this vision of what we want the sort of interaction between, the user and us, Oso, and authorization in the application to be, where it is a declarative policy. Like that is kind of like one of the key things around how you write policies is declarative, and you can kind of see the two sides of this. Like one is this idea that you just tell us what you want to be true, and we use that to like both do data modeling and also like implementing the logic behind it. Okay, so that's kind of like the first piece of it, and there's some other stuff we haven't covered, so I'm going to go a little bit deeper here. So some of the other functionality this supports is having some implied roles. So I'm going to define this other field, implied roles, which previously I had as empty. And what this allows me to do is actually set up kind of like relationships between roles within this organization. So I can say that if you have the owner role, you should by default be a member. Like that's fine, owners, members, maybe let's add some guests in there as well. So maybe we have a guest who has the read permission. Members, they can read and write. And so if you're an owner, you should be a member. If you're a member, you should be a guest. You can do everything a guest can do. I can like set this up here, and then I can go and remove some of this duplication because, well, members can already read because guests can, and owners can already read and write because members and guests can. And I've like compressed all my logic down a bit here, so I don't need to worry about like accidentally forgetting to add something to every single one. Like I know if this is now like read issues as well, like it just gets added to the whole hierarchy. It's kind of nice. So that's one thing I can do. And then the other thing I've kind of been like hiding out of view is where I think this really starts getting very, very powerful is starting to define having multiple roles defined over multiple resources. Right, so it's probably not the case that I just have roles and organizations. I can also have them on like the sub resources, so repositories in this case. So okay, cool. I do the same thing again. I define my repository roles. In this case, I'm going to have a very simple one where I just have like a read role and a write role. And if you're a reader, maybe reader and writer would be better. If you're a reader, you can read. If you're a writer, you can write. And I haven't done imply, so let's just make sure I got read in here as well. Okay, so now I have a repository role as well, and I'm gonna comment this one out for now and come back to it. All right, cool. So I've like assigned these roles, but if I go back to my application and I'm now doing, let's say my repositories index, and I make this an auth session, this one, does this one work? I think this one works. Yeah, okay, yeah, this should work. All right, so I've got my role for repositories index. There might be too many things going on at once, but let's see how we get on. So now, okay, so I'm John, member of the Beatles still. I'm actually going to go remove my permission. This is a bit interesting that I can John, I can delete my own permission and now I shouldn't have access anymore. Okay, so John, I left Monsters again, so I'm just a member of the Beatles, and I want to go and see the repositories, and I can't see any, which is a bit of a shame. It's like, okay, so right. You know, we need to make sure that John has a role for the repository as well. But you know, if you use GitHub, right, like you don't need to go and assign someone a role for every single repository inside the organization. Like quite often you just inherit that from having some amount of permission on the organization. And so we can represent this in Oso as well, and in how we configure these like relationships between resources. And this is like a really important concept that comes up, not even just in roles, but across like all parts of authorization logic, is establishing relationships between resources. So I have a repository, I have an organization, and basically what I want to say is there exists a relationship between those two. In particular, the relationship exists if the repository is in the organization's list of repositories. And we need to make sure that the repository is a off-type repository. That's currently a current limitation in Polar that we want to get rid of soon. But so I'm going to configure a relationship here, and I'm going to set up this role map. There's a few ways we're thinking about allowing you to configure this, but for the sake of this demo, what this is going to do is say how an organization role maps into a resource role, a repository role. So I'm just going to say if you're a member, you can become a reader, and if you're an owner, you can become a writer. And again, this is kind of all in the spirit of this just being declarative. The idea is you just tell us like how are the resources in your application related? I have a relationship between them. I don't need to think about the authorization logic and model that satisfies this. I'm just going to tell you what I know about my app. And with this in place, cool. John can now see Abbey Road again. You know, so John is going to have the right permission inside the repository. And let's see if this is going to work. So you may have noticed earlier that I had in my repository model, in my organization model rather, I had this base repo role. This is so in GitHub, for example, you can configure what's the default role that a member should have. And that may be stored as like a field, for example, in the organization. So I'm going to see if we can actually propagate that inside the policy here. So what if I say members is the organization default base repo role? That could be fun. So if I do that and go back to Beatles repos, I wonder what it is for. Let's get my SQLite open again so I can see what we have in the database. Select staff from organizations. So it should default to read. So I'm not sure we necessarily have this set up correctly. Oh, wait. John's an owner, so this isn't going to work. Let's try this with somebody else, right? So, okay, so what do we have? We have John is an owner and Paul is a member. So in theory, so John is an owner, means that John defaults to being a writer of the repository. So indeed, he can read it. That's great. What if I instead log in as Paul? So Paul, still a member of the Beatles. That's great. Paul is a member. And if I go to repos, I can't see anything. Great. This is awesome, right? I can't see anything because the base repo role is read, which isn't even the one I configured. So let's go and do that. Let's do update. Oh God, do I remember SQL well enough to do this? Base repo role equal to member. Hey. Cool. So base repo role is now member. I go into repos and Paul still can't read. Did I typo it? Oh, member is the wrong thing. Member is the one for organizations. The base repository role should be, let's say, reader. Base repo role reader. Success. So Paul can now see everything inside Abbey Road. Sorry, all the repository Abbey Road, because he, through being a member, has inherited that like reader permission. And so what I'm trying to kind of like show here is really just like the power of this like pretty simple configuration, but we can even start doing things like dynamically pulling attributes off of the organization in order to do some like dynamic role inheritance structure. So I'm kind of hoping that this is getting everyone watching kind of excited by some of the potential stuff for enabling in Oso. Because really, like, we want to take away as much of the thinking as possible around like what is the right model for you to do. So all of this is like incremental, right? We started off with just definitions. We added implied roles. We added other resources. We added relationships and so on and so on. You can really build these things up, but it like has everything you need it to do like when you need it. So I'm gonna go and talk about the implementation of the policy backing this, because I think that's kind of an interesting one. But if people have questions around the roles model stuff, or if they want to see any other examples or how they might achieve a certain use case, you could talk about it now. I'm going to refill my tea in the meantime. Also, apologies if I'm talking super fast. I tend to get kind of excited about this stuff and talk fast. All right, so let's look at the policy that's backing this. So you've probably seen some of this before. There is endless bike shedding around naming of some of these rules, but it all follows a very similar pattern. So my kind of bases of the allow rule, and I'm just going to be like allow role if role allow. So I'm going to encapsulate all of my like role based logic inside role allow. And it's kind of made up of two pieces. One is checking what role the actor has, and the other one is basically checking does the role have that permission. This is kind of like the core of like role-based access control, is this like two-phase thing. Like, does the user have the role? Is the role allowed to do that thing, right? So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, there's like some interesting design decisions around whether a role is itself like defined like for a resource, or if the resource is encapsulated inside the role. And so like previously, we've often had this include an additional resource parameter. And I think that's primarily because it's like an easier way to implement it inside the application. The core thing here is that we're actually able to skip some of that because we're using our data filtering stuff. We sort of know that a lot of these constraints or lookups are all going to happen as one database query anyway. So we don't need to worry about being like, oh, only getting back as some subset of roles. Okay, so this is like the core two-step thing. Check user as a role. Right now, I'm sort of hard coding this with a helper Python method. So I'm just pulling all this will make a database query, which isn't like the final version of this, but I'm basically pulling out all the roles that the user has, and then I'm checking so you see I'm doing user role in that list of roles, and then I'm checking what other roles that user role implies, and that's going to be the one that I'm saying the user can actually assume. And so in the simple case, a role implies itself, right? So if I have a role in an organization, that organization role implies I have a role in the organization, like very redundantly or tautologically or whatever. It's like a role implies itself. And so in the simple case, right, this just goes through and check and gets an organization role. But where this is really powerful is it's now also going to kind of explore this like potential like tree of options underneath that single role. So like what are other potential implied roles? So here we have our child roles. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to check that there exists a relationship. So this is where I'm effectively consulting the declarative configuration that the user told us about how resources are related inside their application. I'm checking, so there's a resource associated with the role. What are the child resources of that role resource? And then I also want to like pull out the role mapping from that as well. So this like querying, here I'm querying that relationship role, and basically it's the unification process of the logic programming here is kind of like setting those variables to whatever's defined inside the rules. So what I'm basically expecting to get out a child resource and a kind of map of roles. Kind of another important detail here, like in the case of data filtering, all of these will just be propagated as constraints. They won't necessarily make a database query until the very, very end. We're just saying, in this case, for example, repository exists inside the list of organization repositories. So I might not even know I might not even have the organization in my hand yet. I just know that, a user, if you think about like the database modeling, right? A user has an organization role, which has an organization as its resource, which may be joined to the repository table, has a child repository, and then like that series of joins is all just getting like pushed into one query to find like what are the repositories I can read, that kind of thing. I'm iterating through the role map. So just to remember, right, the role map has like the role in the organization and then the role that it implies. And right, I can just have a string, or I can have, again, just like an attribute lookup, which will be just pushed into a database constraint. So I'm looking for the role name. So here I'm matching, I'm like, instead of just purely iterating through the map, I'm actually looking for one which matches the role name that I have in my hand, right? So I have an organization role. The name is maybe, what do we say, member, and the resource is a specific organization. So here I'm looking for an entry in the role map that matches member, and then I'm pulling out the implied role. And yeah, so the implied role in this case is going to be a name. It could be a string. It could be an attribute. That doesn't really matter. We're just like we're returning just a dictionary which has a name and a resource, which is the same format we expect for roles everywhere. It's just some object that has a name and a resource. This is kind of interesting, actually. So there's sort of like two kinds of types of like role data that we're throwing around here. There is the concrete object that exists in our database. So from organization roles, right? These are my concrete roles that actually exist, that have been directly assigned to someone that I can see in the UI and manipulate. But there's a kind of this like second set of these like implied roles which don't exist in a database anywhere. Like I haven't. Do I have anything in repository roles? Oh, I do, but these aren't the ones actually being used for. Let's just get rid of all those. Delete the unknown select delete thing. These are the ones that are actually being used to evaluate any of the logic here. They're just cruft seeing around from before. So yeah, like so alongside my concrete organization roles, there's this kind of like set of transient implied roles that don't exist in the database, but are still useful for making authorization logic. And that's kind of what this like little structure here represents. So I've constructed it as a dictionary. It has the same format as we expect from a concrete role object. But in this case, it's not actually like a specific concrete class or anything like that. And basically, this is going to get propagated back up through, right? So role implies role, this role implies that role, and ultimately user role implies some role, and that gets propagated through to assume role. So I've kind of gone through this logic now, finding this assume role here is going to basically return or represent all of the possible roles that the user could have concretely in the database or implied ones, and maybe expressed through constraints or expressed through concrete strings or whatever. I'm just like passing around this role object that represents the role they might have. Okay, cool. So next thing we need to do is check, does the role have permission to do an action on the resource? Right now we're just actually doing our like authorization logic. So what permission does this role have? Well, it gets kind of complicated again in some ways. We're going to see some temporary workarounds for some limitations we currently have. Okay, but there's a couple of ways that you have permission. Check for direct permission. Role directly has permission. Did I write the same thing twice? Oh no, I see what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm just doing some like kind of convenience things here. Basically, I'm checking for a role having permission on a resource, and in the case of role-based access control, you don't really, once you've determined the actor has a particular role on a resource, you don't really care about the resource anymore. And so this is what this initial check here is doing. First of all, I'm going to check, does the resource associated with the role, is it the same as the resource that I'm trying to check for permission on? Right. So if I have an organization role or I have a repository role, I obviously want to check that the role is for the organization or the repository that I'm looking for permission on, if that makes sense. But like once I've done that check, I don't care about the resource anymore for my like permission checks. So that's how I structure this in this policy, is like to deal with that up front so that I don't need to like worry about I don't need to pass around the resource anymore and check it again. I had this little workaround hack type check, which is something that I think we could just support directly in Polar, but we don't currently. All this is going to do is combine a specializer with a concrete class object. This is technically a constant registered to match the class. Basically, this argument is going to check that the input type is of type organization or is of type repository, and then the result argument in this case is the class object. This basically allows me to like extract the class from whatever I'm passing around. As you know, in Python, right, this would be the equivalent of doing like instance dot whatever it is, like class or that kind of thing, or I guess like type instance, whatever. So we're just kind of achieving that in Polar, and this is actually kind of important because these also work as data filtering constraints. So even when I don't have a concrete repository in my hand, this will still allow me to propagate that as a constraint that will get handled when I'm evaluating the query, which is kind of cool. So I'm extracting the resource class from the resource. So I now know, okay, I have a repository role, it's applying to this resource, so the resource class is a repository. And so now then I just need to check, does the role have, and again, I can kind of throw away the rest of the role, I just care about the role name. Does this particular role name have the permission to do this action on this class of things? And so the direct one of these is I can just do this as a lookup in my definitions table. And so again, I'm basically like querying the role definition, the role information. So as a reminder, right, it looks something like this, right? Role, the resource type, the list of roles. The roles have some permissions. So I'm kind of like retrieving that information indexed effectively on the object type, which is why I had to do it before. And then pulling out the definitions, the role definitions. And all I'm doing, I'm trying to look up the role name in the definitions and then checking if the desired permission exists in that list of role permissions. So for example, like if my action is write, I'm looking for a member role because write is in that list of allowed actions. Another like little kind of improvement I think we want to make here in Polar would be to allow me to write this maybe something like, definitions, role name, right? I could probably write this way better if I could just write something like this, action in definitions, role name, use some sort of like indexing syntax like this. I might actually be able to, it might be possible to do this currently like this. Oh, yeah, so the tricky thing here, let's just see if this works. Yeah, no, it doesn't like that. The tricky thing here is role name is still not yet necessarily just a string. And this is kind of like both the beauty and I think the difficult of using Polar is in our like ideal view, when Polar is like achieved its goal of being very declarative, logic based, you should never need to like hold in your head what role name is. Like, is it a string or is it a constraint lookup in the database? But there are areas where that is still necessary to know. Part of the way they're trying to address this is by giving these like out of the box policies, but I think there's more we could do. Because I remember I showed you there's this case of having like an implied role, and the role might be a lookup in the database. So I don't yet know I don't have the string for this yet. So there's like a limited number of things I can do. Like I can't actually look up in the dictionary this role. But what happens in like data filtering land is, even though this role is not concrete yet, once we get to this like role has permission check and looking against the definitions, I will have enumerated all of the roles that this is really hard to follow logic. Like, hopefully this shows the value of us providing this kind of stuff out of the box. But like the database lookup, it needs to check based on what I know of the role structure. Actually, let me do it as like a simple example. Suppose I don't have implied roles, any of this like fancy business, and I just want to know, is the user allowed to actually, it doesn't even work in this one. I have to do it in the repository as well. I want to check, is the user allowed to write to a repository? Are they allowed to do a push, for example? Well, to resolve that, I maybe need to navigate this role map. So I need to check, in this case, yeah, well, it basically depends on what the base repo role is set to. So in order to write, you can either be an owner of the organization or you can be a member of the organization if the organization's base repository role is also writer. And so like I'm going to have to hit the database for that, and I'm going to have to like defer that logic. And so this is where like the combination of the like constraint propagation piece of Polar, along with like the built-in role stuff, is really like showing you the complexity of the logic that we're handling in like kind of a few lines here, right? Like this innocent looking statement is really looking for a definition in my role, looking for a role definition that matches against the one in the database, where the database has navigated some relationship between organizations and repositories and all this kind of crazy logic. And I think it's just pretty, I'm personally like incredibly proud of like how strong the language is that I could get this far. I think the work for us to do is twofold: making it so other people could write this, and also making it so other people don't have to write this. Okay, so this is like the first check of a permission existing, and we also have these implied checks as well. And so what I'm doing here, I'm doing a little recursive check. So I look for the role. First, I look for the role name in this implies database dictionary, and then I'm basically going to ask the same question. Well, okay, does that role have permission? And that allows me to kind of recursively go. Because I deleted all these implieds earlier. No, I've still got them. That allows me to like recursively go through, right? So, the user has the owner role, but the owner can do anything a member can do, and the member can do anything a guest can do. So I need to check, does the owner have permission? Does the member have permission? Does the guest have permission? And that's been handled in this little recursive rule here. We're checking for the relationship in the implies, checking that has permission. And of course, that might either have direct permission or it might have another level of implied. And there it is. I mean, I've walked you through the entirety of this policy. it's pretty dense logic-wise. There's a lot of kind of crazy stuff going on here, but I still think it's pretty mind-blowing that, you know, in 46 lines, including some comments, we've been able to represent everything I've just spoken about today, and made it possible to just represent entirety of like role-based access control logic as an end user in these just like static configuration. And not only that, right, we can then take that static configuration and we can go and do things and like show you, you know, define all the data models, things like that. As a final thing before I finish, I'm not seeing any questions or anything, but if you do, write them while I'm doing this final piece. I'm gonna show something that I used heavily, which was a lot of fun while I was developing this version of it. So I'm going to drop into my Oso REPL. Let's see if that worked. Here we go. So I'm in the Oso command interface. What I really love about like the approach we're taking in the declarative nature is this ability to then start like introspecting your policy and asking questions of it. And again, this is like all going to be part of the stuff that we make kind of easy to interact with. But I can, let's see if this works. Yeah, okay, cool. So like, for example, I can go and ask queries about what roles exist on an organization. I can then go and start asking things like, what are some of my other, you know, role has permission, right? I can show you all the stuff I was just talking you through. Maybe I should have done this along the way. That would have maybe been a better way to do this. I thought it was too late, but I can go and ask like what permissions, what actions can an owner do on an organization? Create, delete, write, and read, right? And again, this wasn't represented in here, but I'm able to now like go and get the full set of things because I'm using those like all that logic. I can let's see, I can probably, what else can I ask for? Yeah, these are probably the best ones I can do to just kind of go directly. I guess if I do, let's see, is user registered? Yep, user dot. Oh, I don't know if I can query this. That might be asking a little bit too much. Oh, I can do this. Oh, I don't have an actor in my hand. Oh, something I did a lot, which I might not have access to do here. I guess I could do it if I. Let's do. I have no idea if this is right. And I'm kind of going a little bit over time, so feel free to drop off, but. Oh, I meant to quit this. There we go. Let's restart. Why am I not dropping into a REPL now? What did I do? What did I do wrong? This was going so smoothly. So I suspect this is probably incorrect, isn't it? How do I query? Session.query. I might need to do like a .all or something first. How odd. Did I do this in the wrong place? Lowercase query. Oh, wow. Yep. How odd. Yeah, I'm just not getting. Oh, I know what I can do to make this work. I'm just going to put this somewhere else. So inside, let's just do it in here. Oh, maybe it wasn't like loading anything until I actually tried to do something. There we go. Okay. I'm in. All right. So I can now hopefully do things like assume role, user role. Yeah. Okay, cool. So who is my user actually? Print user.wrapper. All right. So, okay. So my user is Paul. Did you proof the roles table earlier? No, I think I'm good. Up and running, thankfully. So, so what I did just talk you back through that. I just kind of like inserted myself inside, dropped into a REPL once the user's already like authenticated. So I registered the current user as the user variable and dropped into my REPL. So I have my user in hand, right? You can see it's paul@beatles.com. And I can now start like querying things like, what are the roles that, right? What are the roles that Paul can assume? And it's really nice because you can see, well, the first one's not so great to look at. Let's see if I do. This is probably going to panic because rep doesn't exist on the other one. Yeah, our organization role doesn't have repr either. What if I just print it? It's not a whole lot to see. Whatever. So you can see I'm getting this first role, the role for Paul on some organization. I guess I can print role.name, role.resource. So you've seen like the first role that Paul has is concretely this like member on the organization, and the second one he has is the reader on this on a repository. And this is all happening. Yeah, this is actually like pulling the data from the database in this case, right? But it's kind of nice that you can now start like querying this like transient information as well. Like I can see that Paul is both a member and a reader, and you can imagine, right, like presenting this in say UI to the user to say like, I can now start explaining to you, you know, Paul is allowed to read this repository because he's a reader on it, and like maybe even, you know, show that was true because you have this like base repo role set and things like that. So yeah, that's just to give you like a little preview into some of the kind of like future work that we're going to be enabling with this is, and I really think this is us realizing this sort of vision we have around declarative authorization, which is like giving this like rich object that you can start both feeding configuration information into, getting decision logic out, but also doing things like introspecting and understanding what's going on inside your policy. And, you know, the kind of things we want to do is do things like visualization of all this. Cool. So I'm gonna stop there. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope this was interesting, informative, and yeah, we'll be making the video available probably later in the week. So if you want to watch it back on half speed or something like that, so you can keep up with my fast speaking, then you can do that too. But thanks for everyone for attending, and hope you enjoyed. See you all soon.